And welcome to the Florida City and County Managers Association webinar entitled Benchmarking and Peer Comparison. My name is Bob Lee, and I have the honor of serving as your host today. Joining me as co-host is Dr. Dina Hurst and Mr. Mike Ryko. Both Dina and Mike are employed with the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government, and they'll be the people who will be assisting most the attendees with any technical questions you may have that may be affected on our end, as well as assisting our panelists for today. Sponsors for today's webinar include the Florida City and County Manager Association, of course, the Florida League of Cities, the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government, the Center for Florida Local Government Excellence, and corporate sponsors, Government Services Group, Strategic Government Resources, and Granicus. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel. First, Erica Johnson. Erica is the Structural Innovation Manager with the City of Fort Lauderdale. Tracy Miller, Manager of Strategic Development, Sarasota County. And Aubrey Phillips, Strategic Performance Manager for Pinellas County. Erica, Tracy, Aubrey, welcome. And before you begin, if you wouldn't mind, just doing a brief presentation, if you would, of your backgrounds for today's attendees, for any of those who may not know of you. I think that would help with the presentation going forward. So Erica, do you want to start first, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be joining you all today. As Bob mentioned, I'm the Structural Innovation Manager with the City of Fort Lauderdale. Just to give you an idea of where I sit in the organization, I'm a part of our city's Office of Management and Budget. And my role is primarily to lead the strategic planning, quality management, performance management, and process improvement initiatives in the city.
Aubrey, why don't you go next? Because I'm going to have Tracy's going to pick up the slides after we do these introductions.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Aubrey Phillips. As Bob mentioned, I'm the Strategic Performance Manager for Pinellas County. We are similar to Erica, structured within the Office of Management and Budget, and we support strategic planning, performance management, and improvement projects for the Board of County Commissioner departments here in Pinellas County. I've been in local government for about 15 years, 12 of which I spent in Sarasota County, where I had the pleasure of working a bit with Tracy, and I'm coming up on my 4th anniversary here with Pinellas County.
Thank you. Tracy?
Thank you, Bob. Hi, I'm Tracy Miller. I'm the Manager of Strategy Development for Sarasota County, and I've been here 8 years now. Prior to that, I spent 20 years with the Alliance for Innovation, formerly known as the Innovation Groups, and we spearheaded many performance management and benchmarking projects through that time frame. And I've been working in this field almost 30 years now, which is painful to say, but it's been a great run. And in Sarasota, I'm responsible for our process improvement efforts, our performance management program, and as well as our strategic planning activities.
Thank you, Tracy. And I'm going to turn the program over to you. I think you want to do an overview, and each of you do have a presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And just as a reminder to everyone, we're going to be taking your questions throughout, so feel free to send them in at any point in time. Today, what we're going to cover for you is an overview of peer review and benchmarking, and then we're going to go into examples from each of our governments. And then we're going to talk to you some about how to put it into practice in your particular organization. And we've given thought to, if you're a small organization or a larger organization, what you might do in those instances. And so we'll be talking to you about that as well. So with that, I've already gotten comments from Alan on the apples, and you might ask, why the apples? Well, you've heard the phrase, be sure to compare apples to apples. Truth is, even in comparing apples, there are many different sizes, colors, shapes, textures, and most importantly, how they taste. That is the main point we are driving home with this webinar, that if you were to put benchmarking into practice, you have to understand the differences of like services in order to really use comparison to make change. You may have particular differences in your particular community that affects the taste of your apple. So you want to understand your counterparts as much as you understand yourself, so that you can go ahead and really utilize that information in making recommendations and making change. So with that, what kinds of benchmarking can you do? Performance benchmarking compares data to identify performance gaps. For example, if you were looking at the number of permits issued or attendees at a library program. So your government has this many and your neighbor has more or less. And those are where you want to say, okay, well, how do I set a target? What might that look like for me in understanding their information as well. You can also do practice or process benchmarking, where you compare qualitative information about how an activity is actually being conducted for insight on how performance gaps occur. For example, one of our favorites here is survival rate of heart attack victims. We think we have a really great survival rate here, and it has a lot to do with the standards set by the American Heart Association. And so we're benchmarking against our counterparts in that particular number, as well as standards that are set by national associations. So you also have internal benchmarking. This is when you're going to compare your metrics and or your practices from different units. So for instance, here we look at vacancy rate and promotion rate across our organization. These are internal benchmarking opportunities. Now, there are many different ways to conduct benchmarking. You can survey your peers or your customers. Certainly getting customer feedback is really important when you're evaluating your programs and services. You can do thorough data analysis, which is really paramount and cornerstone to benchmarking and performance management as a whole. And it helps you to set your indicators and your targets. We do phone interviews, old-fashioned phone interviews, and on-site visits. And really, when you're doing an on-site visit, that really helps you gain perspective of what your counterpart is actually doing. And you can utilize that information in your recommendations. And of course, utilizing associations to help you identify what's a best practice and where our practice is going in the industry. And one of my favorites is to follow accreditation criteria to set internal standards of where you might make improvements within your organization. So it's important to note that benchmarking is rooted in good performance measurement. We have to understand and validate our data, and it has to be current data so that we can effectively compare ourselves to others. It's also extremely important to be transparent with our data and to really look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is where we can make significant change and ultimately realize competitive advantage. So if we only look at good data, things that make us look positive, it doesn't help us really make improvements. So it's really important to look at all aspects of that as well. Okay, so effective benchmarking requires research. A lot of people think you can just do simple internet searches to find the information that you need. And the truth is that's not going to help you provide a real strong and solid foundation for making benchmarking assumptions and recommendations. It is more than just numbers and data. It requires communication with your peers or counterparts so you can establish comparability and really look at what other organizations are doing, as well as understand your own organization even better. You can't just rely on that simple internet search to create a defensible assessment of what it is that you want to do to make change in a program or service that affect people's lives. So we have to be really careful about what we're doing there. Interviewing your peers, it sparks innovation. You can identify what worked well, what didn't, and what to do differently for yourself. So we can't underestimate the value of a network. Knowing who to talk to is very important if you are to do effective benchmarking. Not only do you need an external network, but an internal network as well of people who you can help, who can connect with you and help you to understand and realize change. You may even consider standardizing your peer group. In Sarasota County, we have an administrative directive that lays out who our peer comparison counties are, and that helps us kind of have routine measurement and benchmarking with our counterparts. And they're in the region, so we know this is what Manatee is doing, or this is what Charlotte is doing, and that creates an expectation regionally for what our citizens can enjoy. Doing research can also help you to understand who is doing things the best in the world. We've done some really interesting studies on affordable housing that looked at global changes that were being instituted in affordable housing to try and really, address one of our most major concerns in providing providing housing to our community. Even if you don't adopt those philosophies, you can always learn from those leading practices and see what the appetite is for your community locally. Okay, so whether you are in a large or small government, formalizing your benchmarking approach is a good thing. You can standardize the peer group you use by selecting cities or counties that share your characteristics, like population or beaches. One of the things I love is to compare town gown university towns to one another. I think that that's really important because they have different feels and flavors. Or your economics, for instance, if you're a big tourism location or agricultural, you want to compare to others that have those same kind of similarities. It is also good to benchmark against your neighbors because, as I said before, it creates a standard for what our citizens can expect in the region. And you might consider adopting a policy that provides guidance to the organization about how you do it, who your peers are, or for instance, ensuring that you have peer review as part of your elected policy discussions. And one last and final thing is you might consider doing or having an internal group of people who are your benchmark champions. These are the people who can come together and discuss your benchmark analysis and really help you to think through what you might recommend to administration as you move forward. Bob, I see your.
Yes, we have a question. A question has come in and someone did answer part of it, but you mentioned networks.
Yes.
Are there organizations that exist that collect benchmarking data in the state of Florida? And do these organizations compare measures from cities or counties? And there was a response that the Florida Benchmarking Consortium is one. So I just wanted to pose the question to you as to what resources are out there relative to the network question that you posed.
Yeah, so networking on benchmarking takes different forms. And some associations like Florida Benchmarking Consortium have gone ahead and tried to standardize the measures that they get and the data and then provide that back out. The problem with that is there's oftentimes a lag. And we also require this real-time data if we're working on something that has a change-oriented feature to it that we have to do. Like one of my future examples is a transportation service. We had to produce it for the board when they wanted it. We didn't really have a whole lot of opportunity for lag. So we've seen that with ICMA. Even in the Alliance for Innovation, we had this kind of period of time where the data isn't as current as we might like. Erica and I are both on a dashboard system that allows for us to share data in a library, and we can share those data points as we do them. I personally have not been able to utilize them to the full extent because my partners aren't in there. And so having this, tension between having all of your partner data in the format that you need, as current as you need it, it's a real challenge. And so, one of the things I think Aubrey and Erica and I would all suggest is that it's really important to talk to people. to have that network of folks that you can talk to, pick up the phone and say, hey, can you tell us how you're doing this? And it may not be a simple data point. It may actually be, how are you doing this? And one of our current projects here is prepaid landfill accounts. I'm not expecting any association to really have a ton of information on prepaid landfill accounts, but we need it, and we need to deliver it to administration next month. So, we've had to go out and get that information, and there's nothing wrong with doing that level of research as part of your benchmarking efforts. Okay, so with that, I believe, Aubrey, you are up, and we get to move over to you.
Great, thank you. So I think I already did introductions, but I'll state again for anybody who joined late. I'm with Pinellas County. I'm Pinellas County Strategic Performance Manager, and we can hop right in. Thank you. So within Pinellas County, the Office of Management and Budget is really responsible for championing benchmarking within the organization. And we do that as part of our overall approach to managing performance with county departments. As Tracy had mentioned in the overview, one aspect of our benchmarking approach is we have identified 4 core peer comparison counties. And this is really helpful for particularly those that may be new to the organization or new to benchmarking. These are other large urban counties that have a similar economic and demographic mix to Pinellas County, and create a great benchmark for peer analysis. But we also, as part of our approach, frequently look at other organizations. So often that's leaders or high performers in specific areas. Sometimes it can be driven by a promising practice that we learn about from another jurisdiction. And then we do additional peer research to learn more about how we might apply something like that here. And overall, benchmarking is really used in a variety of ways, and I'll describe some of those examples later, to inform policy decisions, but also to set service level and performance targets, and to help drive improvement activities. So I think you'll see some of that in the examples that we'll cover next. So here briefly, I'll cover a few examples before I dive into a couple in more detail. A few years ago, there was an effort to update the county's travel policy and modernize it. As part of that effort, the team that worked on that policy update looked at 14 different travel and reimbursement policies to help identify best practices and processes and inform that policy update. For user fees supported by benchmarking data, OMB was able to recommend support for an increase in the animal services, veterinary services fees that allowed the department to recover a greater proportion of their actual expenses incurred. And that was because that was aligned with what we saw peer counties charging for those same services, helped to justify that increase. For all county lease agreements, the rental rates have to be benchmarked to comparable market rental rates or fair market value. CIP project portfolio management, which is an example I'll dig into in a minute, was an example where we used practice benchmarking that Tracy mentioned a little bit earlier, that really informed the development and implementation of a project portfolio management approach in our capital project planning. The strategic performance management team that I lead, we used peer interviews extensively a couple of years ago to really inform our program planning and development. The organization had undergone a management system review, came back with some very high level recommendations, and it was by connecting and talking with our peers across the nation that were really recognized as leaders in this area that helped inform our approach to how we developed our program and built out our services. Parks level of service from this most recent budget year, based on an analysis of service level targets across work groups and activities, that was compared to best practices among both peer jurisdictions and professional associations, which are also a really great source of information and best practices and identifying peers that you may want to interview and follow up with. That analysis resulted in the board supporting a plan for right sizing the resources in that department to the level of service expectation that's been set. And finally, the next example that we'll go into, emergency rental assistance, has been rapid benchmarking. To Tracy's comments earlier, sometimes you don't have time to wait for an annual report. It is on the fly and moving quickly. So we can head to the next slide and I'll share a little bit more about that effort. So for those of you who may not be familiar with emergency rental assistance, this is a federally funded program funded through two different congressional pieces of legislation. And it provided states and certain localities with funds and program guidance to implement emergency rental assistance for low and moderate income households that had been financially impacted by COVID-19. In Pinellas County, both the county unincorporated area and the city of St. Petersburg received funds for administering emergency rental assistance. And the county and city came together very early on, along with nonprofit partners who had worked on rental COVID relief earlier in the pandemic, to around this common goal of creating a coordinated countywide emergency rental assistance program that was one front door for our residents to address housing instability due to COVID-19. So as a result of that commitment to that shared goal, we actually have two jurisdictions, City of St. Petersburg and Pinellas County, operating under a shared set of program policies and with the same program administrator. So that's given us a built-in internal peer to compare to as the program's performing. But also we've really leveraged our relationships and developed our relationships with peer counties who are also administering emergency rental assistance program. Here for our peers, we really focused on Florida cities and counties because Florida has some very specific laws around eviction. We've been collecting benchmark data in terms of applications received, reviewed and approved, average size of award, and total assistance dispersed. But really the most meaningful information that we've gained from this peer benchmarking effort has been the ongoing coordination and communication on the shared service delivery challenges we're facing, how we've approached that, and what data has shown us that those solutions have been effective. So here's an example of, not something that any community had 2 years ago in terms of a program that addressed emergency rental assistance in a pandemic, and peer comparisons and peer benchmarking has really informed how we've moved forward. And I apologize if you hear ducks in the background, that's not your imagination. I have pet ducks. And last example that I wanted to share from the earlier list was our capital improvement project portfolio management initiative. This was a project the county undertook a few years ago with the goal to adopt a portfolio approach to prioritizing capital projects and overall improve the process that we use for managing projects. We use practice, benchmarking, and peer comparison to really inform how we developed this approach. So we talked to our standard core peers, Hillsborough, Palm Beach, Orange counties, but we also looked to GFOA and ICMA and other jurisdictions that have been recognized for excellence in capital planning and management. So we ended up talking to places like Boulder and Mecklenburg, but also White Bear Township, Minnesota, who had a whole white paper on their approach from GFOA that really helped to inform how we move forward. So this was very early on in this initiative. We did peer interviews with each jurisdiction, really focused on what did their framework and approach to capital planning look like? What were their processes for initiating projects, validating the data that was being reported about those projects, prioritizing projects within their capital portfolio, and monitoring and managing performance on capital project delivery. We then shared that information with all of the directors who had departments that manage capital projects, and that really helped drive how we approached our capital planning process. As a result of that, we had a new approach to capital planning, but also increased engagement and ongoing performance improvement. This wasn't us going out to a consultant and saying, hey, how should we do this? It was us collecting information, sharing it with the staff who were ultimately going to be impacted and needing to implement this improvement. And it really allowed them to engage with the information and drive a decision that was more informed than they may have had just coming into the project fresh. And I think, is Erica up next?
Hi, everyone. Again, this is Erica Johnson.
Erica, may I interject just before you begin, please? We do have a question that's come up that perhaps this is for our prior presenter. The question is, do any of the presenting organizations use benchmarking in conjunction with process improvement models such as Lean or Six Sigma? And how would that work? And that would be for anyone. And it could be one we could put off if you want, because it isn't directly related to what was covered, but it is a very important question and applicable question to our topic today.
I have a little bit of information on my in my slide deck that I can provide to lean into that question a little bit. But Aubrey or Tracy, if you want to take it away right now, I'm good with that too.
So I think Erica's going to, pun intended, lean into it with lean management a bit. And I'll go over process improvement a little more in the presentation that I offer a little bit later.
Okay. So we'll pick up on that a little later. Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. So I'm the Structural Innovation Manager in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Tracy, if you go to the next slide for me, thanks. Here in the city, which is, we provide a little bit of a different perspective than Tracy and Aubrey, representing the counties for today. But here in the city, benchmarking is really and fundamentally built into our performance management program. And how we really make benchmarking come alive there is, we're looking for relevant data and benchmarks to develop what internal targets or, indicators of success look like. And how that comes into action is, when we're not reaching our targets and we're monitoring our performance data, that's really our clue that we need to reach out to our peers. And like Tracy and Aubrey both alluded to, having a network is so important, someone that you can call, having a relationship and trust built so that you can be really transparent in what's going on in your organization and they can be transparent in what's going on with theirs. But reaching out to those peers to find out, hey, what's going on in your organization? What's working for you? What's a successful strategy? Do you have a best practice you could share? Do you have a policy, a procedure, a process, some sort of cultural framework that allows you to be successful in ways that, we're not currently doing? And I didn't include it on the list here, but I think one of the most effective questions I've had in reaching out to my network is, what didn't work? Where did you fail? And I think, when you're in the innovation space, we talk a lot about failing forward. And I think that you can learn so much from other successes, but even more so from their failures. And again, that's where the trust component comes in. By, understanding how can we position ourselves to be successful. The other thing that I found as a part of our performance management program and benchmarking that's really critical is documentation, which I know that that's not, a fun word to throw around, but it really is so important. Understanding who did you talk to, what cities, provided different data, and understanding what their methodologies were. We talked a little bit about, nowhere, everyone says they're unique. And even when we talk apples to apples, it tastes different. We have different cultural challenges in our organizations. Our demographics might be a little bit different in our city, different economies. Understanding what that is goes into your methodology. But it's also important to understand, where are your data sources? How are you calculating that? Because I've oftentimes seen, we can have artificial failures and artificial successes where we think we're doing a lot better than we really are. And then we find that, our peer organizations are much more conservative in how they're looking at this. So, when you're reaching out and doing your peer interviews, really dig into that and understand and be comfortable with the differences, why they're doing it differently or why you're doing it differently, and kind of building that into your process. So a couple of examples that we had, and I'm going to share two specific ones, but we've used performance benchmarking to really build out our strategic plan and what those performance indicators look like, to say we've achieved our 5-year goals and not. We've launched an innovation academy, of which, of course, we use benchmarking to kind of indicate, how should we roll out this program? How many people should we target to train? What does certification look like? There's a lot of different anecdotal pieces that you can learn along the way as you roll things out. But two that I want to highlight today, I'm going to start with one, and that is the city's nonprofit grant funding. And so for the past several years, the city of Fort Lauderdale has provided nonprofits throughout our city with grant funding. And the reason that we've done that is because it provides a really flexible way for us to enhance or provide different services than what we're traditionally doing through our city operations. So for example, we've partnered with groups that are really reaching out and working with our homeless population, or really looking to enhance the arts and culture of our city in ways that we just don't have a role in that way. So we were directed last year, as we were going through our budgetary process, to create a more transparent and objective process for what that looks like. So our first step was to reach out to our peer communities, and find out how much are you providing in grant funding? What does that look like? What does your process look like? So, we reached out to communities that are in our county. So Coral Springs, Hollywood, Pompano Beach, but we also reached out to our neighbor to the south, Miami Beach, and up north in West Palm and Orlando, to really understand, what does this look like in your city? So the first question, as I mentioned, was how much are you providing in nonprofit funding? Any, $1 million, $2 million. But when you look at this collection of peer communities, you realize that they're quite different. The city of Pompano Beach is much smaller than the city of Orlando. So we had to normalize what that looked like. So, we started talking, instead of dollars, percents. What percent of your operating budget are you providing? And that really created a much more easy way for us to kind of see, where we fall. Do we fall in the middle of the pack, in the back of the pack? Are we, very aggressively leading the charge? And once we understood that, we were able to then reach out to them and find out, what processes are you using to, select nonprofits to partner with. And so we were able to find out what worked for different cities, what didn't work, what they do different, and we were able to tailor make a process that would work effectively for us. So this is the first year that we've done it. As a result, we opened up applications to nonprofits for the first time. We had no idea how many we would get. We got 107. And those, we had a community advisory board, our budget advisory board, which is comprised of residents, really lead the charge on doing the evaluation of what that looked like and what services would be most effective using taxpayer funding. And they provided a recommendation to our city manager as we built out our budget process. And as a result, several new organizations received funding that had never received funding in years past. We had much more public comment period. We had, an opportunity for commissioners to weigh in and provide their feedback at the public hearings. And so now we have a total of 43 organizations that we're recommending to be funded to really benefit our community as a whole. So it's much more transparent, much more objective than it's been in years past. And it is our first year doing this, and this is where I kind of wanted to tie in with the lean is, we've gone through this 1 year. While we started with benchmarking and peer review, we now realize that, hey, there's a few opportunities where we can really look at our process and see if there's opportunities for us to lean this out even more. There are ways to reduce how long it takes to, evaluate an organization? Are there questions and things that we need to include on the application on the front end that will make, our agreement process and legal process on the back end easier? So we're definitely applying that toolkit now. But we started off with benchmarking, which is kind of how we're seeing the integration of the two. The second program that I wanted to highlight is our parks and expanded space and green space. And so we've had at the city a goal for quite a few years to ensure that we have a park within a 10-minute walk of every neighbor. And what 10-minute walk means is a third of a mile, distance between a neighbor and a public park. And so we were really able to set this goal and target using some of the benchmarks and methodologies provided by the Trust for Public Land, the National Recreation Park Association, and the Urban Land Institute. And one of the ways that we've really seen some improvement move forward with this is in 2019, we had a $200 million voter approved bond go through. And so that really allowed some additional resources to expand our park space and improve some of the facilities that we already had, which was the feedback we were receiving from our community. And so with those additional resources, we've really seen this goal that we had, many years ago come to fruition, and we've increased our parks by 4.5 acres since that time, and we're continuing to move forward and engage with the community. So this is just another way, having that benchmark data and that program available, once, additional resources come on, it really helps us to drive what our goals are and what they should be in a relevant and appropriate manner. So thanks for listening to Fort Lauderdale. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer any as we go along.
Thank you, Erica. All
No
right,
questions
so-
at this time, Tracy. So
Thanks,
just proceed.
All right. So we're moving over to Sarasota County. And I think one of the things you've heard so far in both Pinellas County story and Fort Lauderdale story is it's about what works best for you. And so in our approach, we created an administrative directive in 2013 that applied across the organization. And we outlined in that who our peer comparison counties were. We have Manatee, Charlotte, Collier, and Lee, who are guaranteed 4. And then we have additional ones that can be utilized if you want to expand your search. When do we use this? Pretty much all the time. Whenever we're doing program or project enhancement, we're going out to our peer group and we're taking a look at what they're doing and how they're doing it. Certainly for things that are coming in front of the board, we want the elected officials to feel comfortable that we're not on the bleeding edge, but we're on the leading edge. And so those are important aspects when we're developing program that seeks to change things. We have used this approach for both anything we do internally, as well as for when we're asking consultants to come in and create a study on something. We'll go over some examples of that. And we use all of those insights from peer review to develop our recommendations and really create change. So some of our examples, and I was asked earlier if process improvement was part of it. We have process improvement teams that we've been doing since 2013. You'll see the first 6 or 7 of those were all process improvement team efforts. They all included a benchmark component to it. What do we do? So as part of our charter, we outline, something between a 5-month to 18-month process for a review. And we do stakeholder analysis and surveys and things of that sort as part of it. But we also require a peer review to be conducted. So the team that's working on a process improvement will actually gather together. They'll set out what the questions are, what are the general demographics they're looking for, and what are the specific kind of like open-ended questions. And then we do actual telephone interviews with our counterparts. Sometimes we have difficulty finding out who to ask. And so we have to go up our internal network of folks to say, okay, well, we need our county administrator to contact their county manager so we can get to the right person. Luckily, we have a really good network and we do share. And one of the things that we try to do as a standard protocol is share the results of the peer review with anyone who we've asked so that they benefit from the information as well. In the case of the last 2 on this list, both in mobility fees and SCAT transportation services, those are external reports. And it provided invaluable information for us to go ahead and decide how we're going to steer those programs. They didn't tell us what to do with the programs, but they just helped us to steer them in the proper manner. We'll talk about SCAT a little bit more later. So in 2016, we conducted a process improvement team effort to look at development review cycles. This was a large team effort. Actually, Aubrey was the leader of that particular program, and then Pinellas stole her away, which I'm still very sore about. So we'll have to see about that in the long run. And it was in part a large team because not only do we look at development review, but we also looked at review times for both commercial and residential permitting. And so it was an intense program. In addition to standardizing the information we asked each peer, we also did site visits with 4 of the peers. We went to our cities and Manatee, and again, you gain invaluable insight when you're doing a site visit. The effort resulted in 36 recommendations in 3 categories, many that have already been enacted, but some that we're still working on, and some that we decided no, because when we're doing a process improvement effort, we act like an internal consultant team, and we provide a report at the end with a host of recommendations. And then it's up to the actual stakeholder to decide which of those recommendations they're going to enact and which are not. Sometimes it takes a while, if it's a big technology deployment, which this one includes, it just takes a while to get through that. Our counties tend to be larger entities that don't move as quickly. And so we need to take that data and then take time to go ahead and develop the results. So that was development review. Additionally, I mentioned SCAT Transportation Services. Our board had been for quite a long period of time wanting us to innovate our transportation services, to modernize bus service. They got tired of seeing buses that were pretty much empty and a big general fund transfer to support it. And so there becomes this balance between providing a very necessary service to our community, but yet doing it in an economical and efficient manner. We actually got a consultant to come in, and they did a heavy deep dive into our data. They looked at bus routes and usage and dollars, and they went ahead and did an advanced peer review, and didn't just do it on our locals, although that was very, very important because we always want to benchmark against our local agencies, but they also did a look at what was happening nationally. Again, really valuable information about how we might change things. So what did it do? We are in the process of developing mobility on demand. We have transportation hubs. We're rebranding our service. Huge changes, trying to be more competitive with the current market as it relates to transportation. So going from what had been the way we've always done it to something very, very different. And we are in full implementation now. So with that, and I'm going to invite Erica and Aubrey back in, we kind of wanted to just wrap this up for you. And then we can take specific questions. So how do we put this all into practice in our organizations, in your organization? What do you need to do? And so here are some of our best tips that we have for you. Erica or Aubrey, which one of these are your favorite? You have one?
I think the two standouts to me are right there in the middle. The benchmarking is more than numbers and data, and that it requires research. Data is great, but without context, it's just numbers. You've got to have the context to really make it meaningful information that can help you feel confident about recommendations you're making, decisions you're bringing forward, and some of the networks that were mentioned earlier can be really useful as a way to build your network of peers that you can reach out to. But having those relationships and doing those deeper dive research, it's well worth the investment of the time it takes to do it.
I definitely agree. Those are my favorites as well. I think having a network is so invaluable because with that network comes everything else that's on the list. You through that network and communicating with people, you can really get defensible performance data points. You can understand that context that Aubrey was talking about. You can share strategies for improvement. It's the foundation of everything else.
And I would say, and I know my counterparts agree, defensible performance measurement is really super important. Understanding your data is critical, and oftentimes we don't. We don't really authenticate the data as much as we would like, and so it's really important to do that. As part of that is formalizing the methods that you're using. This doesn't have to be rocket science. I saw there's a question regarding our process improvement model here in Sarasota County, and it's custom and it's simple and it's not meant to be overly complex. It includes a stakeholder, kind of a typical project management phase where we're we're looking at stakeholder information, we're gathering data, we're doing review of that, we're process mapping, and then we're ending with recommendation writing and really driving those points home in presentations to administration. But at the end of the day, it's up to our sponsors and our stakeholders to decide which steps they're going to take forward. Those are important skills, not only the important activities for not only the department that we're helping, but also for the participants. So it becomes a great professional development opportunity. It helps to expand people's thinking. It really helps, we have a lot of folks who don't write on a regular basis. So report writing, it demonstrates to them how a consultant might pull this information together, and it proves that we can do it internally. I estimate that we save about $100,000 every time we do one of these analysis. And on top of saving those dollars, just in consulting fees alone, we're also teaching our people very valuable skills going forward. With that, I wanted to also, we talked through, Bob reminded us that smaller governments may not have the same level of resources. We're rather large organizations, the three of us. And so we appear to have more resources. I think in some ways we do. I will tell you that back in 2008, in the recession, we lost a lot of our middle layer of our organization. And so the people who would have done that work in the past pretty much left. And we haven't really refilled those positions. The positions that have come back have been more specialty. And so these generalist type positions are kind of few and far between in our organization who might work on this. And so what I would recommend is that, if you're smaller or you're just struggling to find the resources at all, that you partner with your colleges and universities, try to tap into that intern network or grad student. I did a project for a local government when I was in my graduate program, just as a way to both get them exposed to your organization, but also get some help in that regard. You can partner with your regional counterparts. When we were doing development review, several of our counterparts were also wondering what we were going to do because they were going to follow. And so, you can work together in that regard as well. Coaching your internal folks to do this work with more seasoned folks who have already done it, or, in FCCMA's case, we have a managers in transition program. You can certainly tap into those folks to help teach your folks how to do it. I'm always a train the trainer kind of mentality. We want to teach people how to do this work because it's so invaluable. And again, really consider interns and young talent. Young talent are oftentimes starved to learn how to do things new. And they're a great opportunity, or even just like new to your organization. One of our process improvement teams, I asked everyone how long they had been with the organization, and everyone had been in the organization less than 5 years. And they were looking for ways to connect. And so this was a way to do that. So anything you guys want to add in this?
Tracy, may I just jump in with one question we haven't addressed that actually was referenced earlier? The Florida Benchmarking Consortium, I think they have over 50 members, cities and counties. Some are included in the peer groups that you've all referenced. The question here, when you're looking at apples and different approaches that you take, which I thought was a great slide, I'm going to use that myself too in the future. In terms of alternatives for people, can you address maybe the Florida Benchmark Association or Consortium? Because the question here is, why aren't they presenting today? And I know you put this panel together purposely to talk about what you each are doing, because you all are professionals in this. And I think it would be easy to argue that the majority of cities and counties don't have professionals like yourself on staff. So if you can address a little bit about the Florida Benchmarking Consortium, because it's been around for a number of years. And like I said, many of your peer groups that you've referenced are members.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could just address that a little bit, I
Sure.
think that would be helpful to some of the attendees.
So this was really about a practice. In practice, how do you use it? Not about how do you get to data. There are many ways to get to data. I have, for instance, today, my emergency services folks on this webinar, and they're working at accreditation. And so, they're accessing data in different aspects of their accreditation process. So in terms of what we wanted today, we really wanted to talk about the day-to-day, how do you do it? How do you put it into practice to make program changes or develop programs and really innovate at that practical level. We have one of my hats I wear is as the professional development committee chair. And so we have talked about doing a performance measurement 101, which would also have a benchmarking component, but it would be more appropriate to do it there than it would be to do that in this particular environment. As I said, we really wanted to root this in how do you use this on a day-to-day basis to make change within your organization. Okay, so with that, we can open up for slides, Bob. And I wasn't sure if you had any for us. I didn't see any come across. Oh, and you're muted, Bob.
You always have to do that at least once during a Zoom session, right?
Always.
Typically, you like to do it before the session starts. But
Which we
given
did
that we have,
earlier, so it's all good.
but given that we have about 10 minutes, I would encourage any other questions that you may have. Maybe waiting for those questions to come in, Tracy, Erica, Aubrey, maybe I could just pose a question. If you had to identify the key takeaway today, recognizing, is Tracy, and I appreciate you mentioning it earlier, that the majority of local governments in Florida are much, much smaller than what you three represent. And all that means is that they have typically less resources to count on. Some of the most capable people in local government I've ever met are from small jurisdictions. Key takeaways that may be applicable to them as well from today's session. If you had to, pick out what you thought was most important, each given 30 seconds to describe that, what would you say?
I guess I'll go first. And I personally feel like our formal administrative directive has been extremely helpful. It has set forward who our peers are and who you have to look at all the time. It also has said, who do you need to network with? I think in application, as I've mentioned to you all earlier, for instance, we're doing a study right now on landfill prepaid accounts. It becomes very granular very quickly, the things that you're looking at. And so if you're having these relationships with your peers, you're kind of, utilizing them quite often. And for us, that starts with that formal directive. Aubrey, you want to voice in?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I would agree, leverage networking associations to build those relationships, because you never know when a project's going to come up where you may need or want to leverage those, and having those points of contact is invaluable in those circumstances. As far as specifically for small jurisdictions, I think the key takeaways for me would be, one, you said it earlier, Tracy, it doesn't have to be rocket science. So much of this is just understanding, what do I want to know about how other people are doing this, or what kinds of results they're seeing, and then having those conversations. And I think learning how to develop this capacity internally, and Tracy is exactly right. We've had great success bringing interns in, unpaid internships, and getting a lot of value. They're young people who are really excited to learn more about local government, to feel like they're making a difference, as well as internal staff within your organization. People who are in the organization often want to be part of driving change and improving their day-to-day work life. helping, even if you have limited resources, it's not too hard to train someone on how to use these tools and apply them and coach them to get the value out of it that otherwise you would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for consultants to get the same kind of product and information for your board and your administrators.
I would add, start small. Identify an area where you have a goal and you want to improve a process or you want to launch a new program, and start there. Identify what that goal is. Use benchmark peers and communities to help you identify what that goal is, learn from them to build out your program or improvement, and build momentum. It's easy to talk about all of these elaborate processes and programs that we have, but it all started somewhere. It started with one benchmark, one program. So start there, build momentum over time. I'm always shocked and amazed that even though we kind of have benchmarking, I'm helping to champion that effort, in one area of the city. There are so many people that have those relationships and networks already, and when you kind of identify one goal and start working with them, there's always so much more at your fingertips than what you think you have. So start small, build momentum, and look within.
We have one other question, probably time for just one other question that has come in, and it reads as follows. Are any of the representative organizations displaying KPIs, I guess that's key performance indicators, I'm guessing, and or any strategic planning evaluation material online for public consumption and transparency?
Well, I'll go first, and the answer is yes. Within the and I didn't mention it earlier. Unlike my counterparts, we're actually in the county administration office, and so within county administration, you can find our strategic planning information that includes quarterly reports and KPI data, as well as progress on our strategic plan.
Yeah, we share a strategic plan update once a year, but we also have a dashboard that we have on our website. So if you go to cityoffortlauderdale.org or .gov, you'll be able to find that. In that dashboard, we put all of our data, where we are, where we've been, what our targets are, and if there is appropriate benchmark data that I mentioned we use to build out those goals, it lists where we're getting that from and what they are. So.
And similar to my colleagues, we also do share performance data online for transparency purposes, primarily through our budget book, which then has links to every department. It has a performance page with their key indicators, special projects that the department's pursuing and the progress of those. And then we are in the midst of refreshing our strategic plan, and a big focus of that is building out other data and related to strategic planning evaluation and the outcomes we're driving for.
And I wanted to follow up and just say, having our strategic performance dashboard has been incredibly helpful, both as a tool for our strategic plan, performance management, and for benchmarking. We have wide ownership, about 100 users throughout our organization at the highest levels, really utilizing, sharing, providing data on a monthly basis, and that allows us to benchmark internally as well as to our peers.
It certainly evidences the necessity of a strategic plan that's applicable, that you're going to be working from. It correlates with those benchmarking specifics that you've referenced. Any final comments before I make some concluding remarks?
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I know my counterparts and I are always available to help you as you think through what you might do. This is kind of like step one, so to speak, in making performance management, benchmarking, peer comparison practical for your organization.
Thank you, Tracy. Erica, Aubrey, very much for the time that you put into preparing this presentation and, of course, delivering it. I think what I gained from the presentation was a lot of the basics that I think was important for people who maybe were not that familiar with benchmarking. Yes, it's been around for a while, but I think those basics are really important. And I also appreciate the fact that there's different tools that you ought to be looking at, whether it's universities, interns, professional staff, and the Florida Benchmarking Consortium that many have taken advantage of as well. I think collectively it provides some resources that people in Florida can utilize to get there. But again, I want to emphasize the importance of strategic planning and how it must tie into that. You just can't have something that is not congruent when it comes to benchmarking and strategic planning. So with that said, let me also just recognize Professional Development Committee and Tracy as chair. Appreciate the webinars that you all have put together this year. Very well done. Want to acknowledge the board of directors for FCCMA, because the FCCMA board has been strongly supporting these webinars, monthly webinars, at no cost for their membership. And they've been doing it for quite a number of years, 14 years. So we really appreciate their continuing to support that. And most importantly, we want to appreciate and recognize the attendees. I think we had somewhere 70 plus, mid 70s on the webinar today. Without your participation, these things obviously wouldn't have any value. So we very much appreciate you as attendees for participating. And finally, when I say we are now adjourned, a evaluation is going to pop up. We hope that you would take a few moments and complete that. So with that, thank you all again for your participation, and we are now adjourned.